I think you have to have an element of spirituality in you. You have to look for a higher purpose and see that you were given the gift of a life, and that you have to take care of that life and do the best out of it, not only for yourself, but for others. And actually, the best thing you can do for yourself is to be helping others. That's as easy as that.
Beautiful.
Well, I hope we come back to humanism, to respecting each other, to going for the root causes of the problems, and that we understand that the most important word in the world today is the word together. Practically nothing can be achieved on our own. In any area, you need to see that you are part of something bigger. And that means, in concrete terms, as we talked about earlier, that you have to bring in elements of society that normally you don't work with to get solutions, because the problems are so complex. So you have to bring in the different actors, parliament, business, private sector, academia, and so forth, that we talked about earlier.
We see two narratives dominating the politics of migration. The one is I call it the mass immigration fear-mongering narrative. So whenever there is an increase in cross-border migration, we see politicians claiming that this is the new waves to come, and we can expect hundreds of millions of Africans to come to Europe. And it creates this whole climate of, this is just a trickle for the waves to come. The other one is, of course, the classic allegation towards immigrants that they take away jobs, healthcare, public housing, and so on and so forth. And that's sort of certainly in Northwestern Europe and also in the UK leads to a narrative about immigration is undermining the welfare state. I think these are perfect strategies for politicians to basically create a smokescreen and take the attention away from the real causes of migration. And the real main direct cause of migration is quite simply labor demand. I mean, if you look at the history of immigration, both to the US and in Europe, it all started with recruitment of migrant workers. If you go back to the 1950s, 60s, 70s, that recruitment took place initially in Southern Europe, later in North Africa and Turkey, if we take a European perspective. But once, of course, people started migrating, networks kicked in, family members helped each other, and the migration flow sort of perpetuated itself. But most migrations have started with some form of recruitment. Now, these days, recruitment takes place more informally. It no longer goes through an agreement signed, let's say, between Germany and Turkey, or between France and Morocco. It now is often happening through the so-called free labor market. We see all the employment agencies playing a very big role in recruiting all sorts of labor from inside and outside the European Union. So we see a very close relation between levels of economic growth, employment, and immigration. So if the economy tanks, migration goes down. If the economy goes up, immigration goes up. And of course, a lot of family members follow economic migrants. So by and large, this is an economic phenomenon. And there's a huge level of hypocrisy in this.
Another big issue is what happens to the Republican Party after Trump. Trump basically has trashed everything the Republican Party ever stood for. Personal morality, a laugh. Personal responsibility, ridiculous. Fiscal responsibility, utterly destroyed. States' rights, gone. Respect for traditional institutions, down the drain. This was not that long ago, the basis of the Republican Party, and Trump has destroyed it all. So what is the future of the Republican Party? Another big issue confronting the Republican Party is demography. As I said, us old white guys, we are the most shrinking part of the electorate. America's on the verge of becoming a majority-minority society. What is the future of a Republican Party that depends upon older white people who are rapidly dying out?
They had been elected for 2 months at the time,
and they were already now so frustrated. And the main frustration was the culture they were part of. And the main reason for the political culture was the press. They were being called up by journalists, by respected media, asking them. I still remember this newly elected politician saying, ask the other ones, is it supposed to be like this? I get a call from a journalist from a big newspaper asking me for a comment on a report that came out 20 minutes ago. And I say to the journalist, can I get 20 minutes to read it? And she said, no, I need it now. I have a deadline. Yeah, but I haven't read it yet. Well, then I will go to another political party in the opposition, and they would get the airtime, right? And she said, well, then I think it's, and then she had to come up with something and criticizing the government for not doing enough. She hadn't even read the report. And she said, and she was so frustrated. Is this the way it's supposed to be? Some of the politicians, they spend 70% of their time in parliament dealing with media, trying to do tweets, trying to update their Facebook profile, try to write op-ed pieces that could go into newspapers, try to pick up the phone when journalists call. They are so obsessed with journalism. Then let me say something maybe very controversial.
Shoot.
Comparing terrorism with the most important handgun and weapon for terrorists, such as ISIS, is not Kalashnikovs or suicide bombs. It is journalists. The whole idea behind terrorism is that you create news stories that are so dramatic and so newsworthy that they will be covered. By doing so, the journalists and the news media will spread the fear to the mass population. That's the whole idea behind terrorism.
That's also symbiosis between the terrorists and the journalists and the politicians.
Of course.
It's all a big dance.
It's a big dance. I'm not comparing populists like Donald Trump to terrorists, but I am saying that same logic lies behind what populists are doing.
So anyway, what an open access economy is basically where we leverage our existing community structures, like the governments and administrative bodies and sort of supply chains and all that sort of stuff. All that stuff is inherently useful, and we can repurpose all that for once we have a different priority. At the moment the priority is profit, okay, and making a living. That's what we prioritize, number one. So basically everything, all our apparatus in society is based around that goal, that, okay, we all have to make a living from this. I have to make a living, you have to make a living. And then, companies have to turn a profit, blah, blah, blah. All this stuff. But a lot of that stuff can actually be repurposed if we change our perspective on what's actually important and what is better for us in the long run. And that's something that we don't think about. We more or less just say everything is kind of short-term interest. We live from paycheck to paycheck, more or less, most of us. And that's pretty much all we think about. But of course, all our decisions, all our economic decisions have externalities and effects that happen in the real world that are obviously damaging the planet. For example, most of our choices in buying plastics and that sort of stuff are like polluting the oceans, and we're driving cars to work all day and which are polluting the air. And there's a whole lot of other things. Everything that we do has a kind of hidden consequences that we generally don't think about. Okay, so if we're looking to create an open access economy, we have to sort of bring those hidden costs of living, we have to understand those in ways that we don't understand today. And when we fully assimilate that information as to what is actually the literal cost of living between our resource management or resource use and our use of each other, or exploitation or our interaction with each other, then it becomes obvious after a while that actually we can actually do better if we don't use money. If we just imagine for a minute, what I always say to people is, okay, just suspend your disbelief for the moment about a world without money wouldn't be possible. Just imagine for a moment, okay, it's possible. Just accept that first. Then you'd start to say, well, if it was possible, and if you structured society based on different priorities, as in, working together, the communities, as in promoting environmental health and promoting bodily health and well-being, if all that was our central focus rather than money, then obviously I think anyone would agree, yes, that would be a better way to go.
I think I'm someone else when I have access to Wikipedia than I would be without it. I would say that mine and many other people's usage of devices is actually change in our bodies. That my body doesn't stop in my hand, it stops in the device I'm holding. And for that reason, we are, I think, different. We are different not because the internet exists outside of us, but because it's a part of us. And how that changes our capacity to feel empathy, how we can feel as close to someone on the other side of the world. That is a new feature of this species, of this human feature, of this human species and the elements that go into being human. So I think that opens up another way to organize societies too, where we don't have to be physically close to the people that we love, and many people aren't. Many people spend their lives working in a country where they're treated horribly just to be able to send money back to another place where there are people who they care deeply about. Like that's how we are now. And I just think that this is the moment where we could also create and claim platforms that help us live that way, in a way that is more just than what we have now, where when you are born, you get a lottery ticket, and that's the passport that you happen to be assigned at birth. And if that was a good lottery ticket, good for you. That's going to affect your life more than what gender you're born in or assigned or any other circumstance.
You can imagine how much money our hospital is going to make. Now, when I say money, people think, but I thought you're making a world without money. Yes, we are creating eventually a world without money, but we're doing it by using the tools of enslavement as tools of liberation. This is a process that's going to start slowly, and as it gets stronger and stronger, it's going to speed up until one day people realize that we haven't used money for the last year or two, and yet we have more money than we've ever had before, and yet we don't need to use it. Because whatever we do in our town, in our community, is free to the people of our community. But we charge for the people outside of our community. So if we make computers, everybody will get export our computers around the world. Because everybody works in the different businesses. The whole One Small Town model is structured on everybody contributes 3 hours a week towards one of the businesses or one of the projects. The 3 hours a week model often confuses people. It's very, very simple. So if you have a town of 10,000 people, you got 30,000 hours of labor per week. That's a lot of hours of labor.
And that's enough to make it running, so to speak.
The model works so smoothly and so well. And also, please understand, we have very advanced technology. We have very advanced blockchain technology. So we know exactly who to put where. It's not just a bunch of hippies getting together growing food on a patch of land. No, this is the most structured, the best possible business plan and business model put together that we can imagine, because we're now doing it for the benefit of everybody in our community. The benefit for the investor is that the investor has no hostile competition, no hostile competitors, because we only have one bakery in our town. That bakery is owned by the investor and all the people of the town. So when we bake bread, we're baking bread for everybody, and we're exporting bread to all the supermarkets and all the hotels and everybody we need to export bread to. But there's no competition between one bakery and another bakery. We're all benefiting from the bakery. Now you can take it to, and when I said one small town is going to be a huge attraction for conscious billionaires and conscious millionaires to invest in, and I believe it's going to become a stampede. The moment the first one small town takes off, there's going to be a stampede of investors because there are only so many small towns in the world. There's a finite number of towns that you can invest in. And all these millionaires are going to be going, oh my God, I need to get in on this. Can you see what's going to happen?
Yeah. Like you said, using the enemy's tools to liberate yourself. Yeah.
So then what happens, just to finish the story on a high note, is what happens is the profits from these businesses get distributed to all the people every month. So you're going to get all this money and you're going to put it in your bank. You still have a bank account. Nothing changes. We're not saying we're stopping life. Everything carries on as normal. You might still have your job somewhere. You don't have to stop your job to be part of a one small town. You can still work, carry on. But there'll come a time that you'll be making more money every month from the distribution of the profits than you're getting from your job. So what are you going to do? Are you going to carry on working like a slave at some job for 10 hours a day? Or are you going to stop working like a slave and just put more time into your town and your community because you're already getting as much money or more from your 3 hours a week? This is a no-brainer, right? So everybody's going to leave their jobs. So we're going to see a huge shift in how industry changes, how we create new materials. All the mines will probably close down because we no longer need to have mines. New materials will be created. We'll have different needs and everything will change. And people have more money in the bank than ever before. But because everything is free, the food, the education, the healthcare, everything is free to the people of our community. So you don't have to use the money in your bank. So this is when I say the people realize, well, look at how much we have. We have all the stuff, and yet we have all the money in the bank, and we don't need to use the money. And that's when they realize we don't need money. We need each other. Money does nothing. People do everything.
If our value system were to be changed, not entirely overhauled, but to be changed in such a way that really acquisition of wealth is not really our priority over priorities, yes, I think that actually capitalism would change, because the power of capitalism has been that it put together in a very consistent fashion the pursuit of profit by the enterprises and the pursuit of wealth by the individuals. So these two really parts go very well together, and that made capitalism strong because in our ordinary life, with daily actions, we were supporting the value system which made capitalism grow and expand. Now, if we were to be less concerned about that, if, to use Adam Smith again, if we were more people from the theory of moral sentiments and less people from the wealth of nations, yes, we would actually, change the way that we lead our lives. We would work less. We would be less interested in material advantages, and maybe we would be more interested, I don't know, in going to concerts, having nice discussions, and so on. So,
well, that's what people love to do.
Yes,
that sounds like a beautiful life to me.
Very often they say that, but also they are actually very keen when you look at the fact that they fight very much for every improvement in their lives, for their improvement in wages. They work hard. It's I'm not only talking about the West, but take China, for example, where they're actually now trying to make people work a little bit less, because the Chinese kind of a way was so-called 9-9-6, which meant that you work from 9 in the morning until 9 at night, and you do it six days a week. And
oh my God,
it is too much,
Yeah.
But let me just tell you one anecdote. When, of course, Europeans work much less now than the Chinese. But I remember in the 1980s when I was in the World Bank, and I had similar discussion in Africa. Many people in Africa were totally shocked and appalled how much Europeans work. because African bureaucracy was really working and probably still working, 4 or 5 hours a day, and Europeans were working like 7 or 8. And they were just saying, well, we cannot compete with you guys. You're just working too much.
Yes.
I don't really myself see that there's any particular connection between wealth and being able to hold, a good election. I mean, the good elections that are held, as we've talked about, I mean, the elections that we see in Africa today have become incredibly expensive. And the reason they've become incredibly expensive is partly because of the digital technology that we talked about earlier. It's, you can spend 100 million, 200 million bringing in that technology, trialing it, buying the equipment. Imagine you've got 40,000 polling stations in a lot of countries. So you need to buy a verification kit for 40,000 polling stations, have 40,000 verification kits to start with. So those are very expensive elections. But actually, if you really want to, you can hold a piece of paper and pen election incredibly cheaply, much more cheaply than that. And yes, that is money that could go on education, healthcare, etc. But elections are actually a tiny proportion of the budget of African countries. And there's no reason why they can't actually be provided. And as I say, I don't think it's true that people with low levels of income aren't able to make informed choices about their futures. We've actually seen, in some of the poorest countries in Africa, think about Benin, which was very poor at the point at which it became a multi-party democracy. Zambia, which was very poor at the point it made the transition to multi-party democracy. These countries have had transfers of power, democratic transfers of power. Both are now facing a democratic challenge and a period in which you will probably see democratic backsliding, but both have actually made important democratic breakthroughs. So again, I guess I would say that it is a challenge to build democracy in countries where the state is weaker and where government resources are more limited, but it's not impossible. We have to be careful not to make those assumptions about communities just because they might have slightly lower levels of education or slightly lower levels of wealth. But I also think there's a broader point here, which is really important to make as we end, which is that one of the things I think we've seen from the last 10, 15 years in Africa is that actually holding elections and building in accountability is important for driving and forcing governments to perform better. In other words, it's not the case that you can get a good economy, a strong civil society, the rule of law, national identity sorted under some sort of benign dictator and then transition to democracy when you've got it. Because what most of those benign dictators do is they become Magufuli, completely crushing the opposition in civil society. They become Museveni, whose economic sort of successes initially have started to become sort of critiqued by people within Ugandan society as people are frustrated that there hasn't been more rapid change. Or Zambia, where President Lungu is actually presiding over massive economic decline as well as political decline. I think you don't get in these systems, and if you think about the 60s, 70s, and 80s, we could see this. We had 30 years of authoritarian regimes in Africa with fairly, in some cases, benign leaders. President Nyeri, President Kaunda are probably about as benign dictators as you would imagine you would get today. And yet in none of those countries did we really see the development of the conditions for thriving, successful democracies. So for me, it's more plausible to think that actually you kind of build these things hand in hand. In other words, you build a bit of democracy, it creates space, it creates stronger rule of law, it helps to reduce corruption, that creates a more dynamic economy, that creates a bigger middle class and a stronger civil society, that supports a process of further democratization, which in turn leads to better government decisions, which in turn leads to economic growth, which in turn leads to strengthening of civil society and the further expansion of the middle class, and you create a positive cycle in which accountability supports those things that you were talking about, and those things then support democracy back. I think if we shield governments from accountability and we shield them from their people, and we tolerate a kind of return to the one-party state, what we'll actually see in most countries is that governments not having that pressure will relax, will cease to focus so much on the provision of public services, will become more corrupt and more inefficient rather than less, and that actually that will put the task not just of democracy back, but also of driving development back many years.
If you like this video and other interviews and talks on Mind the Shift, please like, share, and subscribe. I appreciate all the support. Thank you.